Right, ladies and gentlemen, in the AP European History world, this is the office at home. This is where we hang out and grade essays and do work, and normally my lovely wife sits right over there, but she's making cupcakes for my son's birthday party at school on Friday, so she isn't sitting right there. So I've taken over the office in order to sit and do the first installment of what we're going to call In Case You Missed It. In case you missed any of the information that goes through on the study guide, or in case you're looking for a nice quick review of things, I'm going to provide that here. So this should be about a 10-minute video, hopefully hit about half of the subjects on this Unit 2 study guide, and then there'll be another one that follows it that does the other half. So we're going to start right at the top, and I'm just going to roll through the study guide, not mentioning every single thing, but mentioning the important things that I think you should know if you're going to perform well on the multiple choice exam and also write yourself a really nice essay. Okay? So let's go. Starting right at the top, it asks me about the three major French families involved in the French Wars of Religion. And on the far left-hand side, we have the Guise family, an ultra-Catholic family that had gotten money from the Jesuits and from Philip II, people who thought that Protestantism should be stamped out in every way, shape, and form. In the middle, the Valois, the ruling family of France, a Catholic family, not as Catholic, I suppose, then, as the Guise, but certainly still the leading family of France, and very strong outside of the capital city of Paris. On the right-hand side, the Bourbons. The Bourbons were very popular in the southern or Navarre region in the bottom of France. They had just switched over to being Calvinists in the last generation or so, because by being Calvinists, it gave them the opportunity to perhaps resist the power of the monarchy in France a little bit more. So they're called Huguenots, and honestly, that is not really a religious switch for them. It's more of a political move. Let's move down the list here. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The massacre occurs when the son of the Bourbon family is scheduled to marry the daughter, or the sister, I beg your pardon, Margaret in the Valois family. This is supposed to be a bury-the-hatchet wedding. By marrying the two together, we will bring the Bourbon family back into the Catholic fold. We're marrying Henry Navarre, or Henry Bourbon, to the sister of the king. He has three other sons, and honestly, no one figures that that Bourbon boy is ever going to see the throne. Once in a while, history throws you a curveball. Of course he's going to see the throne. It wouldn't make a cool story if that wasn't the way it was going to work out. Okay. At the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the Guise and the Valois team up in order to make war against the Bourbon. And when the dust settles, it looks as though the Bourbon have been decimated, but not the case. Henry Navarre survives and leads his family against the other two families in what we call the War of the Three Henrys. When he emerges successful and victorious from that war, Henry becomes the King of France, who we call Henry IV. He takes on Catholicism because that's the majority religion of the people of France. The phrase is, Paris is worth a mass. So controlling the country, especially the center of it, was worth becoming a Catholic, or worth taking the Mass in that sense. He also offers a moment of religious tolerance, which is pretty rare during this day and age, but the Edict of Nantes, issued in 1598, offers religious tolerance to Huguenots, or those Calvinists living within France. By doing so, Henry distinguishes himself as what we call a politique, someone who's willing to see politics and economics as more important than religion. Flipping the page. Speaking of another politique, Elizabeth I in England. Okay? Elizabeth was herself an Anglican, the leader of the Church of England, as she was Queen of England, of course. But she did not mind if you in private worshipped differently. Again, another politique idea. It's better that someone should show absolute adherence to the religion in public and then go home and privately and worship as they wish, than to have an absolute airtight, no religious tolerance, where then you're going to have upheaval and problems. Of course, Elizabeth is very different from Philip II, the other individual on our chart here. Philip is a devout Catholic, the most Catholic king he was called, and he's still committed to that idea that Europe should be a Catholic continent forever and ever. Going down the list here, it asks about the role in the Netherlands Revolt. Remember that Philip had inherited the Netherlands. That's one of his possessions that he gets from his father, Charles V. Unfortunately, the people of the Netherlands had really never wanted to be ruled by the Habsburg king, by Charles V then, or by Philip II for that matter. And when they revolted against him, it was somewhat political because they didn't want to be controlled by him. It was somewhat religious because they wanted Calvinist religion and not the strict Catholicism of Philip. And it was also somewhat motivated by other factors, and one of those is Elizabeth, hopping over to this other column here. Elizabeth is happy to give those Protestants in the Netherlands assistance because she realizes that if she can keep Philip at bay by helping their revolt, then they're not going to be able, the Netherlands, I beg your pardon, is not going to fall, and therefore Philip won't be able to stage an invasion of England from the close Netherlands shores. It's a pretty ingenious plot by Elizabeth. For all the thinking that women don't know how to rule, she's a pretty shrewd woman. She knows what she's doing. Looking at economic growth, well, Philip didn't have any. Philip bankrupted the Spanish treasury 7 times. His addiction to war and to Catholic expansion really ruined the Spanish treasury and made the country kind of the weakling it's going to be for the next couple of hundred years. Sorry, Philip, that's the case. Elizabeth, on the other hand, very steady growth, very sort of moderate Protestantism and moderate economic growth that shows England now becoming one of those powerful countries of Europe. Well done, Elizabeth. We move down the study guide and we move into this section on absolutism. The question asks about why Jean Baudin and Jacques Bossuet say why God created absolutism. They create it because God wants order in the world in the same way that God has created the universe. One person should be in charge. That brings order and peace and civility. God would not want the earth to be out of control, and by choosing one individual to reign supreme, God has assured that that's the way it's going to be. Cardinal Richelieu pursues an absolutist policy for the King of France, Louis XIII, while he's in control. Let's look at some of the things that Richelieu does. Number one, Richelieu appoints this group of bureaucrats or intendants who go out and collect taxes for them and make the French monarchy stronger in that sense. Number two, he also has spies, people who you don't know who are hanging around, who keep an eye especially on the nobles in the provinces, want to make sure that they're not working against us. Richelieu also increases the taxes throughout the kingdom in order to provide more and more money for absolutism. One thing we know about absolutism is it's expensive. It costs a lot of money. These movements towards centralization of power were not without their opponents. The Fronde Revolt, which is listed here, is a good example of that. Nobles rose up against the monarch in an effort to try and show that they would not be bullied around by this new rise in absolutism. Unfortunately for the nobles, their revolts were unsuccessful, and the French kings became more and more absolutist over time. The last thing on this page asks me about the start of the 30 Years' War, and the 30 Years' War is kind of a guaranteed started war because of the way they settled the last war. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 had not included Calvinism as a viable option. Lutheranism had continued to spread. The Catholics were not happy about its expansion within the German areas, and there were other states, the Swedish for instance, the French for another, who really wanted some expansion within these now weakened German states, and so they took advantage of the opportunity to engage in war there in order to try and pick up an empire. Gustavus Adolphus is famous here because he's a Swedish leader who leads the Swedes very briefly down into Central Europe in order to make an empire. Unfortunately, he's killed during one of the phases of the war, and that puts to rest the Swedish Empire. The war ends in 1648 at the Peace of Westphalia, and we remember Westphalia because it gives all of the German princes the right to complete political and religious control of their territories, and at the same time, it also is the last real religious war we're going to see. From here on out, wars are about politics and economics, not really about religious fervor. We're asked about the effects of the war. Economically, it destroyed the German countryside and population. Politically, it caused them incredible amounts of independence, which is nice, but if you're looking for a strong, unified Germany, you're not going to get it until midway through the 19th century. And socially, as I said, it's the last religious war, and that's what we should pick up there. We don't see the English involved in the 30 Years' War, and so we're going to hop back over the English Channel for a brief moment here to talk about the Stuarts. Now, the Stuarts had come to England after reigning in Scotland for a brief time, and they believed that they should be able to rule by absolutism or divine right. Unfortunately, the Parliament had a long accustomed history of limiting the power of the monarch within England. It made it nearly impossible for the two of them to get along. Parliament would always want the monarch to be checked in power, and the Stuarts, on the other hand, wanted Parliament to just hand them the money they needed and get out of their way. The two also disagreed over religion. The Stuarts tended towards Anglicanism, but also with a strong tinge of Catholicism, and the Parliament wanted more of a Puritan ideal, which moved the church away from Catholicism and more towards a Calvinist ideal. In 1640, when Charles and Parliament went to war against each other. A civil war began for 10 years throughout English society, and eventually Charles is removed from power when he loses that war. Unfortunately for the English, they replaced Charles with a man, Cromwell, who's supposed to be there to guide the new government briefly while it transitions into a commonwealth or a popularly elected government and popularly run government, and that's an utter failure. From the get-go, Cromwell finds it hard to work with Parliament. He relies heavily on using the army in order to repress anyone who disagrees with him. And when he dies in 1658, he replaces himself with his son. And if that doesn't scream monarchy, what does? So the Cromwell's times are over, and in our next unit, they're going to bring back the Stuarts. Thomas Hobbes, who lived during the period, wrote about this and described the fact that human nature does not do well when there is a variety of opinions. We need one strong Leviathan, one individual who can dominate the society. That's what leads to stability and order. In our next session, we'll talk about the Dutch and the Spanish and roll from there. Take care, folks, and have a good night.